That's not real at all. That's unreal. That's the known.
I would continue to be the devil's advocate. Not that I don't enjoy a lot of mythology, but became careful. That a myth is to extrapolate the meanings. And Jyoti, you pointed out that if it's up to the individual. I don't know what is the purpose of it, but in a perfect world, the individual will extrapolate the meanings out of this myth story and will do with it, will adapt it or reject it or whatever. But the way it plays in the world is not like that. And again, I'm talking about, again, I'm that devil's advocate. I'm talking about monotheism, talking about both Judaism and Christianity, and I'm less well-versed in Islam. So there are a lot of myths that in religion that were taken so literally that, okay, you believe in something being real, but to continue it have caused so much harassment and so much persecution because it was believed that, okay, so with Christianity say that Jesus was crucified. Many people adopted it as a source of anti-Semitism. And all through history, Jews in Eastern Europe, Western Europe were reminded of what they did to their beloved God. The myth later on that now is coming back through a QAnon interpretation, and that is that Jews need baby's blood. It was thought that for Passover, they need it for sacrificial purposes. And now the Democrats are blamed also for, but that's because of the relationship to Jews, whatever. Those mythologies, I mean, the story of Jesus being crucified can have a very different meaning, but the way it plays is the way it is interpreted, and the way it is interpreted by human beings, by people. And that's why we have to treat myth with appreciation, but without reverence. The reverence is what scares me. The sacredness is what scares me.
The way we interpret a myth, excuse me, the way we interpret a myth, that has got cultural boundaries. And isn't that what this is all about? You interpret the myth depending on the culture in which you live. For example, Christianity talks a lot about grace. Is grace a myth? That's a question that I am asking.
Well, I would say yes, in the sense that we don't always, it's not something you can prove factually. You can think it's real, but I don't know that you can prove it. You know what I mean?
Well, I think that grace is kind of the mysticism of Christianity, and it hinges almost 100% on you believing it.
Right. When I said, when I'm using the word real, what I mean is the difference between a story and myth is that you take a story as a story, and you take a myth as having something real about it. You could be completely wrong. The myth may be completely untrue, or to the extent it's true, your interpretation of it could be untrue. But it's not whether it's true. It's whether you take it as such or some element of it. I don't know that the Greeks took their myths as being 100% true, but I believe they probably took some elements of their myths as true.
So I think that comes into the whole issue of truth. What is truth? And is truth something that is always the same? It stays the same. And once we have it, we keep it. You know,
Mm.
there are the interpretations that are there, but truth can be something very different than that. You know, it can be something that is in the moment, that there's only this present moment, and it's defined the truth, you know, to be kind of guided by an internal kind of sense of what the truth is personally there, and that's what the truth to me is about. It's not about finding these great truths.
So Patrick, thank you for that, because for me, you've introduced, and Smith, and he gave credit to Kierkegaard. He thinks he's, you know, one of his mentors or whatever. And he writes extensively on the concept of subjective truth. And so when the subject of truth comes up, you know, we wind up chasing our tails and all that. And to break out of that problem, I'm of the thought that a person should at least entertain Kierkegaard's concept of subjective truth, which is in the end, as an individual in your existential project, you will decide what is the truth for you on the critical questions. And so I think that's what you're getting at. And then I embrace that idea, subjective truth instead of objective truth.
And I think Kierkegaard has a thing too, where, you know, the project is that to go, you know, to let go of one's own subjective truth and to go into the other person's there and to find the truth of that, you know. Like I remember, you know, I used to be a Waldorf teacher, and it's, you know, one of the things was the parents are trying to do the right thing, and it's like you have to figure out what it is that they're saying. It's not wrong. It's like you have to figure out what is the truth in what they're kind of at, and that then you can kind of get a better idea. And that's kind of, you know, it's sort of like a Hegel thing, you know, that you're trying to find, you know, that spirituality is, you know, consciousness with each of the people and finding that connection.
Now I have a question. What is the subjective truth? Do you mean truth as in our values, in our own values, or truth which means what is reality?
So I'll only share with you the readings I've done on Kierkegaard, and he covers this in the postscript, unscientific postscript, and he wants us to stop tearing ourselves apart in an effort to determine what is objective truth. You know, that we'll leave that maybe to the scientists, but so Kierkegaard, who was an existentialist, you know, maybe the grandfather of existentialism, he felt in the end, in your existential individual project, there will be many issues and questions which in the end will be subjective truth through lived experience and through testing, like example in the case of Abraham believing in God, you know, when that in the fear and trembling, it was through his having done what God commanded him, but in the end not having to do it. He believed it was true to him that God would bring his son back to him. So the point is, for Kierkegaard, subjective truth is a way that we can go forward and not be just totally torn apart and in constant conflict because we can't find. So we engage in a process, and he called it a proficient doubter. We engage in a project, a way of coming to a truth, you can say, that works for me and that I can live with, be it good, bad, or otherwise. And so that is my understanding of Kierkegaard's writing on subjective truth? Crickets.
I agree.
I just don't know how can we carry on a society. And I'm going to today's, yesterday's, in the time that Donald Trump was still our legitimate leader, and talking about disinformation. And I remember people were wondering if he believes himself. Is he delusional or is he lying?
Is he platonic?
Yeah, so the question is, how can we live in a harmonious society when everybody interprets and creates their own subjective truth? I agree with subjective truth as far as our basic moral values, that we need to be critical about our morality and not just to sway with what other people with the crowd is taking us, but go through that through our own conscience. That I understand. But to talk about subjective reality as related to mythology, well, maybe Abraham was right about that he did get Isaac back, although it destroys the whole idea of blind faith in God. If he knew already that it's not going to happen, what's the big deal of going through the mountain and going through the motions? But let's say that's a subjective truth that works. Menashe was another Hebrew king who was talked to go to war with a very dangerous, powerful tribe, something like the Amaleks, by his people for territory in Canaan, which was Palestine at that time. And he was hesitating, but he agreed finally, and if by praying to God and asking him for victory. So after a bitter fight, and he wanted so much to win that he made a promise, and the promise was to sacrifice the first person who will come to congratulate him at the door, to sacrifice him or her to God. I mean, that was a time where human sacrifice was considered something that God likes. So he did win. And when he came home, the first person who ran to his door was his daughter, his young daughter. And he let her grieve for 30 days with her friends. And after that, he killed her and sacrificed her to God. So at that time, his faith in the benevolence of God, or in God being on his side, if he had such, doesn't work. I mean, I don't know that it is, yeah, I see a problem with subjective reality as truth. I see it as an advantage with consciousness as a subjective guide through your life.
Wow.
So I think it's about morality, it's like a subjective morality, or is there an objective morality, and to sacrifice, for some other objective thing rather than finding for himself, he just dropped the ball. He didn't take responsibility himself. He put responsibility on someone else to decide for him, you know? And I think that, you know, the problem in this culture is that, you know, we sacrifice ourselves because we're going to get something out of it. You know, we don't think any further, you know, but like, you know, I think like Nietzsche would say, you know, that's because we've already given up, you know, you know, we've not, you know, we've not taken, you know, the Greek thing of trying to become what we actually can become, but we've already given up.
I have a question, Ayla, for when you say consciousness, what do you mean? If you could elaborate. I know what I feel like I mean, what that means to me, but I'm just curious what that means when you say that.
You know, I might have misspoke when I said consciousness. I meant conscience.
Conscience. Okay.
Yeah, because consciousness is extremely multifaceted.
No, right. Before the talk, I was preparing a big presentation on consciousness, so I slipped. Conscience.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
thank you.
Well, it seems to me that when you say a subjective choice is really the you know, based on the, you know, how you define, you know, what your free will is, you know, and it's really the exercise of your free will. And if you know, relegate your choice to an outside force, outside authority, you know, whether it's being your belief in God or some other totalitarian, you know, authority, then you're giving up your free will and allowing that authority to prevail over your free choice. So subjective choice, I think Kierkegaard was talking about the individual coming to a decision, which is not easy because he goes through his books of you know, dialogues and with his you know, interlocutors, you know, on the decision of whether to get married or not or so forth. It's just back and forth, either or. And that kind of you know, dialectical dialogue with the self, you know, you know, in these different guises of the personas is a kind of a, you know, process of free choice, free willing, and that's what, to me, that's what subjective means. And it also involves your conscience, you know, but it is a kind of a conscious, you know, process. So I think when you say consciousness, you know, I would interpret that as, you know, including your conscience and all the other, you know, aspects of your subjectivity.
So James, thank you. I'll make a quick share. You're making a good, you used the word choice. We were having a discussion about a subjective truth. You used the phrase subjective choice. Is it fair to imagine that after going through this process, being a proficient doubter and skeptic and all that, but and free will, your imagined free will and all that, after that process, you reach a point that you feel comfortable using the word truth, that for you it is so valid and so strongly constructed through the process that you went through that you feel free to use the word truth?
Well, yeah, if you, in that process of a dialogue, you know, of thinking, you're going to, of course, to consider what others or what the community considers objective truth, and all the other you know, versions of what is considered objective truth, and even consider what other subjective truths might be of other, you know, other people's ideas of what truth is. But it comes down to your decision, your own, you know, your your decision, your choice, and especially, we hope that our leaders, that we elect to office are able to do that, and you see the, the catastrophe that has occurred, when our leader does not do that, does not, and like you say, you use the word delusional.
Doesn't have the
That's the
capacity.
opposite of what subjective truth is, and yeah. So the of course the choice you make is really, the choice of what truth is, right?
Okay,
Don't-
but a choice on the basis of some objective truth. How would you, today, when most of the climate community, the science community, I think about 85% agree that climate crisis and the extinction and the loss of biodiversity are a fact, and a lot of it has to do with our doing and our non-doing for the future. So when people have different opinions about whether it is occurring, whether we can do something about it, and or whether to scapegoat somebody for that, isn't it not important to point out that there is something like the objective truth that we need to face?
Yes, but that is the myth of this particular culture. And it doesn't have to be true or untrue. It just has to be a governing principle.
Well, that was a Nietzschean statement right there.
And that's where we are right now. I'm not a philosopher, so, so it doesn't have to be true at all. And this is this whole discussion about culture.
Right. It has to be accepted.
Yes. It just has to be the governing principle.
Right.
Right. There are basic, truths that, we agree, if you are, realistic and and a lot of times we have to trust the scientists who are giving us the information. So how can you can't dispute with that kind of, truth that's coming out of people who know. I mean, you go to a doctor because you assume that the doctor, right, has an understanding of what truth is about your medical condition, right? And how to treat you if you are sick, and how to identify, diagnose, and so forth, and treat you with the right medicines. So there are basic, you can't, there are basic, truths that you cannot deny in order to arrive at a subjective decision about anything like climate change. Those are like the pandemic. We all know, that there are basic ways to deal with the virus. Wearing masks and so forth, social distancing. Those are basic truths, but it's been politicized, right, by our leaders. Okay, and that's why we're in the
Mess.
situation we're in.
Yes.
I have to say, I have a preference to not use the word truth when it comes to stuff that I like to use the word, like for, climate change and stuff like that. I understand that maybe it is a truth. But I like to use the word fact if that's what if our cultural agreement is that we're going to listen to scientists based on the facts, and that there's multiple sources saying the same thing. To me, that becomes a fact. And I was raised Jehovah's Witness. My parents are, I'm not. And one of the reasons for my distaste for the world is they call it being in the truth. And you're either in the truth or out of the truth. And it's a horrible mind game that you're forced to juggle when you're young, because they literally call it being in the truth. And then when you leave the religion, you're now out of the truth. And there's a huge energy with that. So for me, I just feel like people argue so much about their truths, and they dig their heels in so firmly that, to me, I just feel like it's all up from the person's perspective. And like, I choose to look at stuff like climate change and the science behind that as the facts. And I do like to explore where the dollar is behind that. If we have a lot of dollars behind the oil industry and the car and the car industry and that, then I need more suspect of what information is coming from those funded programs or they're saying. And the same with the doctor's visit, as somebody was just saying, I'm going to be more suspect of a fact, coming from a doctor if I know that they're funded by big pharma in the backdrop of their education. Now, it doesn't mean it's wrong what they're saying. It just means that I may need to do a little bit more digging if there's money behind that. But when science comes from a point where there's little to no financial gain, I'm more likely to accept that belief as being a fact off the bat because of my experience. But yeah, the truth thing, it's interesting to hear everybody else talk about it. I really appreciate everybody's perspective on how they view the word.
Yeah, and just
this is excellent. This is excellent. I just want to say that puts you in I think, a very sober position in life, which is being a skeptic. You listen to, you talk about the factual reality, and yet you also examine factual reality as far with other facts. You look at what underneath it. And I think that's a great position to be today because there is so much confusion. So you're very clear, Clarity. I like that.
yeah, I want to second that clarity. Personally, truth is a word that is used it's overdone, it's overused. It should be preserved for the highest level of understanding or knowledge. And so at a personal level, I don't use the word truth unless I have been through the process of testing and challenging. Now I can say I have an opinion or wada, but yeah, the word truth we should all use it very sparingly when we really believe in something.
I think
You can't regulate language that way. It's a common word in the language, and people are going to use it.
I think it's even like about fact. A fact is just like a story that someone has come to a conclusion about. So each of the facts is just like a thread of a story. So there might be many threads of the story that seem to kind of point in the same way, and we call it a fact, but it's not. This thing we call fact are just these stories that are there, and there might be like a whole bunch of the stories are all saying this, so we can kind of agree to it. But, the truth of it, the truth to me is we cannot know the truth, just like, we can't know what reality actually is. We cannot know the truth because the truth is all things, are about that. And we don't have the capacity as a human to actually, gain access to all the things that would enable us to know what the truth is.
Well, that brings us right back to the fact that the myths help us establish the truths, as contradictory as that may sound, but it really does, right? Because the truth, the facts by which we're going to live in this culture, in this particular society.
May I say something?
Sure.
I lost you guys for a while. As far as fact and truth is concerned, when I was reading Kenneth Smith, it was, some of the things that he was pointing to in terms of what the possibility of good in every single person, not the possibility, the capacity of good in every single person was very enlightening, because that's something that's very different from everybody who's born in sin. And as far as the truth is concerned, I mean, there are some things that our society has turned into truth and fact. Like, if you want to talk in the medical industry, I take an anti-epilepsy drug, and I was trying to get some health insurance, and they looked at the cost of that drug, and it's freaking $800 per month. And I'm like, what? And it's not a new drug. It's not, it's been used for years. So I'm kind of like, what do I do with that truth? I mean, I'm like completely confounded. And that's a truth to me, because, because I have to buy the drug, and this is what it costs. So it is truth. I mean, I can't get around that. It's you know, what society has decided, whether we want to blame big pharma, whether we want to blame so-and-so, or whether we want to blame, you know, whoever we want to blame. Those are all rationalizations. However, the thing is that I'm facing this right in my head. I mean, right in front of me.
Perhaps
and then what?
It's a fact, but it's not a truth, right? Because it's not what it really actually costs or should cost. It is a fact that you're having to deal with that price point, but it could easily not be that price point. So it isn't really a truth.
Correct.
It's just a reality. It's a fact of your reality, but it's not a truth. It's completely.
But then how do you distinguish that from truth? I mean, like, what is truth?
That's a great question, and I just want to clarify in case I came across wrong. I don't blame a big pharma. I do believe that it's a collective responsibility where we hand our power over, and I think that we're all collectively, you know. I'm not a fan of the blame game of they have the power and, you know, it's their fault. It's not part of how I feel, and if it came across that I think that way, then I must have misspoken, and I just want to clarify that. And as far as what his truth is, I have no clue. I'd love to hear anybody's thoughts.
Let me take a shot at the truth, Jyoti, behind your instincts.
Yes, please.
And that is that rogue capitalism with privatizing necessary basic human needs is not working anymore. Is not working for humanity, where it was expected to solve human economy and human basic needs. It's failing, and it becomes worse because now we are all caught in it, and it's very hard to find a way out. So this is, the truth might be the basic assumption underneath a certain economic system, and whether it is good for people, whether it helps our survival or not.
So here we are. I'm sorry, are you done, Ayala?
Yeah, for now.
So here we are, we're back at the myth, Jody. And the myth in this culture is that healthcare is a privilege. It's not a right.
Well,
And
that was
because
one of them, right?
And because it's a privilege, the value, it's not valued. And so members of society who get ill, good health is not a good. It's not a common good. And we keep coming back to this discussion. These are all the myths on which our society is built. And myths, they're truths for one of that. And if healthcare was a right, then that drug would not cost $800.
That's right.
Right. And if it's the privileged, only the privileged.
Like
Get it.
philosophical standpoint, I think it was Terry who was saying that, I agree with that. I mean, sort of that truth is so big that we really, from our human individual neurologic ability, cannot grasp the greater truth. So we are sort of constructing reality based on these, myths or partial truths or whatever, little slivers. The whole truth, that vast truth is, from a like a, philosophical standpoint, it's too much. And so we've, like from ancient times, like constructed it in different ways, just like I was agreeing with that point too, about before nature was the higher power, right? And then somehow, man seemed to think that they have gotten stronger, more powerful, and less respectful of that, right? And thinking too highly of themselves, which is a delusion, which is part of the mythology. So I mean, I know that, sometimes it gets very semantic, like, this terminology, we're sort of dissecting these concepts in that way. But, yeah.
But let me reinforce. I think what Dia is saying very quickly is just kind of a playful game with the word truth. I think we can all agree it's true, or it's the truth, that the sun will come up tomorrow. Okay, that's an objective truth, in my opinion. That would be considered objective truth. Subjective truth is, I think it's the truth that my grandchildren love me. And for me, that is so strong and so cemented within me that for me it's the truth. But that's a subjective truth. I can't prove it to you. I can't give you a blood sample with hormones and yada yada yada, but I know, and for me that's the truth. And that's a problem we get into, is we should try, if we can, to subject projects that are attempting to discern objective truth and projects that are attempting to discern subjective truth. And that's just my thoughts.
So therefore, truth.
I think there's an emotional aspect here, like what you were talking about, that you believe that your grandchildren love you. It's a very emotional place, versus the sun coming up is a very a scientific place.
And Kierkegaard would agree with you, because he was the one that wrote about the emotions. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And no, I appreciate that. And what I heard in Kenneth Smith was that, yes, nature, nature is all powerful, and there is okay, I won't go beyond that. I think we all read the text, so we all know what he said about nature. But however, I would also argue that there are things in nature that cannot be controlled by technology. So I'm very grateful for the scientists that invented the drug that has helped me. So that there's that aspect too. I'm not grateful for the price I have to pay for it.
Right.
So, but I am very, very grateful that technology has helped me. And that's not, like if I lived in an all natural environment, there would be no solution, or there would be nothing to help me, or maybe, I don't know. So there are different aspects. There's the technical aspect, there's the emotional aspect, there's the physicality of it. I don't know, but I was asking the question, what is truth? However, maybe truth, it can be, truth is not the right quote unquote word, because truth can be in so many different aspects. So maybe we need to divide that up into, scientific truth versus emotional truth which is very subjective, as you mentioned. And
Well, every word
so emotionally, I'm very. The truth is that I'm very, very grateful for the scientists that created this medicine, and the current truth is that I can't afford it, even though they invented it. So, I mean, I'm trying to trying to break down what Kenneth Smith talked about as nature being all powerful and all quote unquote good and content, giving us contentness. Well, how does technology fit into that? I mean, he seemed very like technology has removed us from nature. However, technology is a tool. You can use it for the positive or you can use it for the negative. So there is subjectivity there too.
Did Tim Smith really say that nature is all good and all powerful? I mean, it's we are from nature. Right? We can't deny our nature, that we are from nature, and that we are not always all good and
He did not say nature was all good.
Yes.
Okay. Well, then I misunderstood Can somebody clarify what exactly he was articulating about the natural world versus the human, subjective world that we have created? If somebody would clarify that for me, I would very much appreciate it.
Well, I think that the natural world, we're part of the natural world, but we're just a tiny little piece of it, and we can only understand and grasp the smallest element of it. And that's why, the truth is in the natural world, but we're this tiny fragment of it.
I think the challenges.
But we do seem to have a capacity to influence it a lot right now, even though we're a tiny part.
Can I just respond to what you talked about, Djibouti? I think that the society in which we live has created a common good. And because health is a privilege, that's the myth. The myth denies those who cannot afford it access. And that's how I see that we come right back to the myths by which we live. Healthcare is a privilege. It's not a right. And if it's a right in this society, you would have access to it. And that's the common good. The technology is the common good. All the advances that we make in this society, I view them as part of a common good. The cars we drive, the highways we drive on, that's part of the common good. The tangible part of the common good.
I think one of the challenges in the discussion is that I think we began by trying to deconstruct what the word myth is and what that means. And in order to do that, you got to bring regular words into the discussion. The problem is every single word can be deconstructed, right? Like emotion's a complicated word. What does that mean? Subjective, objective, what does that mean? Truth, reality, what does that mean? If I sit down, at my breakfast table with a family member, say a son or a daughter, and I say to them, God, I heard Donald Trump said this outrageous thing. Is that true? I don't sit down with them and deconstruct the word truth. We have sort of a common sort of sense of what the word means. And so one of the things that's challenging in philosophical discussions is deciding, well, what are we going to deconstruct in this discussion? And what terms or concepts are we going to accept in a kind of a general way, in a general sense? Because I just feel like everything can be deconstructed.
Well, here's a sentence that I have from Kenneth Smith that I like. And the thing again is myths. It says, the Greek myths illustrate the manifold ways human ego and desires and hopes all work within us as the puppets of fate. I like that, and I think that was a pretty good summary.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and thank you, Jerry, for focusing us around myth. And Sharon, I think you brought up the basic mythology, how it contributes and influences our economy, our healthcare, our life, basically. The myth is kind of mediates between the resources created and the distribution here.
Yes.
And yeah, and I think you're right on about the myth of the common good and privileges versus human rights, and those are matter of values, and the values are transmitted and reinforced by mythology. So mythology is not everything, but it is a reinforcer of meanings, of values that later on allow exploitation and really injustice, in my opinion.
I wonder.
Go
Oh, I'm
ahead.
sorry. I can't hear very well. So I'm just going to interject this. Ayala, I love what you said. Do you ever want, I mean, I wonder, because I have young children, is what are going to be, I mean, what are going to be the myths of this current place that we are, that are going to be passed down to our children and their children and their children? I mean, how are we going?
So to offer a possible tool, because I like that question, and I think it was either suggested or hinted at in the piece from Dr. Smith, is are we, if not suffering, but are we experiencing a deficit of imagination, in generally speaking, in the American culture as a result of the leaders, the point put by Jenny, the myth deciders, those that are deciding the myths for us and us accepting them? Have we lulled ourselves into a position where there is a deficit or a loss of imagination? Because going back to your point that the myths are meant to get the other party to reflect or think, well, that's an imaginative process. So that's man's secret weapon, is our imagination. So I think in nature we're about the only creature that has such a thing. So that's a question. Is that's what's maybe missing today, is imagination?
Oh, I wish that was all that was missing. But no, really, this mythology of privilege versus rights, which runs capital, and another is that the privatization, that government should not interfere or regulate our interest, but the market will work by itself to its optimal way. That's another myth. The market doesn't, but that it runs, this mythology is run by interest, by special interests. You know, those fossil fuel big tycoons, the Koch brothers and Exxon and all of them, are pushing myth through funding their own science institutes, their own think tanks, and they produce those ideas that are fit their agenda and feed it. So in fact, they have a lot of imagination. They use the imagination in the service of their interest. And what we need now, I think the left really needs more imagination as to how to put pressure on a changing leadership. Well, maybe we will get leadership. I don't think we had leadership before. I think we had a ruling regime, a power regime. But we need imagination as to how to get out of this marshland that we are in and create new values and maybe a new mythology. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm very happy.
That's what I'm curious about. Like, Ayala, you mentioned a few that could, be part of our mythology in terms of, privilege, in terms of lack, imagination of corporation versus imagination of common man. So, I'm kind of getting a little bit of what the mythology would be to pass on. However, it seems very stark and negative.
Is it imagination or is it value? In fact, he says for values, the cultivation of value-rich and a value-rational social order represents a dilemma for modernized mentalities. That's us. We are schooled in value irrationalism, fundamentally certain that there cannot conceivably be moral, religious, or political consensus. So I think what we need to do is struggle for a value system that becomes a sustainable value system, which we're going to use as our myth.
Which will require a fair measure of imagination, right?
Okay.
It's called the Utopian Project.
Correct.
So it's almost like a generation missed out on imagination and
Correct.
creativity and values. A generation or two, when we stopped passing some of our values in myths to down the generation. Am I getting close to? I mean, because what Dr. Smith mentioned was a complete other interpretation of. So he had a complete other imagination and creativity about certain aspects of what has been passed down, what has been, considered the truth so far. So he used his imagination and his creativity to completely recreate that for us, that aspect of Christianity. And I know a lot of Hindu scholars are doing that now, like, trying to understand like things that were codified by the English, and so then they couldn't be modified by generation to generation. They're trying to go back to the scriptures now and look, hey, what does it actually say? And how can we interpret this myth according to a different value system?
Yeah.
A value system that values women, that values that, that certain myth is actually showing a value for women instead of the other way around.
Nice. Thank you.
Yeah. I think Kenneth Smith was looking back to the Greeks who had the myths that, considered that there was a possibility of a balance, of a more balanced relationship between ourselves and nature. And he said that that our egos, man's egos are puppets of fate. that means that we really cannot, dominate nature, right? Nature is playing with us, and nature is always in control, but we think that we're in control, and that through our capitalism we can dominate nature, deny global warming, deny climate change, and continue to carry out this destructive performance on nature, and ignoring the needs of people, that basic needs of people like healthcare and so forth, and basic living standards, and because that kind of domination is really of nature is really a domination of ourselves by a certain group of elites who are addicted to to wealth, basically. Their addiction to wealth, that there's not enough, never enough, like the Koch brothers. They're already rich, but there's still not enough. They still want to promote coal and become richer by means of that kind of destructive acts of taking fossil fuels from nature and spewing pollution, and so forth.
Regarding mythology and women and male hegemony, they just found, archaeologists found that young women had their share in hunting during what we call the hunter-gatherer society. And the gatherer role of women was a complete myth that has been so exploited. Yeah, if you read the science news now, they were like a major part of the hunting crew in the Americas. So see how mythology has affected, the thinking about the role of women in the house, the housemaker. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that we picked this up. I actually felt a little bit curious about his use of Kenneth Smith's talks almost entirely in he.
Yeah.
The only time he brought up any feminine anything was kind of tempting, kind of treacherous figure, the Seuss's daughter. Somebody help me out where it was in this story. And his writing.
Or eight, or it's ATE, I believe.
It was not a positive depiction of femininity.
I'll tell you.
He referred to Desmonda too.
What's
the
that?
myth of
Desdemona.
Desdemona.
Yeah.
He brought her up. May I help you? He
Yeah.
brought her up on page 28. And it wasn't in a positive light with Ate, the daughter of Zut, who intoxicates us, and she intoxicates us and warps our judgment.
Right, which was interesting in, Christianity also has the harlot, in the book of Revelation, and that, which is a very intoxicating drunk woman that's trying to tempt all of us into this evil. And I thought it was funny. This is the only feminine energy that he was bringing up, and it's all he. And in the last reading that we had about where it talks about the theme that was presented was the gut. But it was all masculine. There was one sentence, which I'm presuming he was meaning a female, but it could have been a male. And he said, it's like reading a poem to a crack whore. And I should have. It really upset me. I stayed completely quiet through that whole talk because, I can pull that apart to having empathy for crack addicts, and they may understand poetry better than the average person. And this thing about a whore, Maya Angelou, which is the biggest gift, I think, to poetry to me, worked as a as a prostitute at one stage in her life, and she's not shy about it. because she wants people to learn from the mistakes that she made. And I think that it was telling to me, and I picked it up the first one we read. I thought, well, this is a very masculine, and I picked up something about his kind of an imbalance between his yin and yang, the author, which doesn't mean that he still has so much to offer, and I don't want to negate that by any means, but I've noticed that coming up, and to me it is a repellent. I think I wouldn't have forced myself through the rest of it, but I really enjoy this group, the men included, all of us. Like, I enjoy this group, so I want to be a part of the group, so I want to be a part of the literature. But I noticed that. Did anybody else notice that, or is this just my thing?
I don't mean to come to his defense, but his whole criticism of Christianity, and the whole Western tradition, for that matter, is kind of a critique of the patriarchal ideology. So in that way, he is, on the side of, feminism, on the side of the feminine, because he's critiquing that patriarchal, idea that runs through the Western tradition. And Christianity is definitely a patriarchal religion, right?
Yeah,
there were many times when he did refer to that. And clarity, I just want to mention that nature has always been a feminine aspect.
Right.
It's
right.
it's the nurturer, it's the creator.
Sure.
It's what kind of like women can birth and nurture versus men are considered the providers.
So he is speaking up for nature.
Yeah. So clarity, hang in there. First of all, I talk about my grandchildren frequently because that's my project. They really bring me meaning. And I have 3 granddaughters and 1 grandson. So I'm with you. And to stick up for philosophy, my probably, they don't use the word favorite, but some of the best readings I've had have been from Simone de Beauvoir, who was a woman existentialist. She was a companion to Sartre, and also Hannah Arendt, who is very highly respected. So there are women in this field that can hold their own. Just unfortunately, there aren't enough of them. So, and I think philosophy would be better off if we had, just like in politics and in culture, philosophy would be better off if we had more involvement from the females.
Yeah, and I understand that his mind is there. I understand that he's consciously on board with that, but sometimes I think that people have slips that kind of come up from their own, where they're actually at emotionally, internally, and that kind of slips out in their art, in their artwork.
Yes.
And so that's all that I was noticing. But there again, I don't have to hang out with the guy. And maybe he'd be really cool to hang out with. I don't know. I mean, I can't judge it on that. I was just curious if anybody else had noticed. Apparently,
Can I just say clarity? In the very first part, 1 second, I'll be done, where he's talking about grace. The analogy he uses for giving grace is of a mother's womb nurturing an infant. So I thought that female analogy was pretty powerful, and it's in the first 5 pages of it.
Okay.
Yes.
And also when he's talking about Desdemona, right? That was in context of explaining the character in one of Shakespeare's plays, where she, was the, a lover of the main character. What's his name? I forget the name of the play.
We're not trying to gang up against you, Clarity. And yes, there are certain
we're
words
with you.
that he uses that, like the word whore. But I think he's trying to re-textualize that. Like, now we use sex worker. and we go, you know, there's a certain political environment, or I don't know what you want to call it, that makes that the only option. And in a way, we can all learn from that, and we can learn from that story or that. So I have a feeling that he is trying to recontextualize that. Like, you know, it's easy to just call her a whore, but let's go back and see somebody like Maya Angelou, you know, go back and see and understand what brought her there, and how she, you know, was way more than that, just that physical act. And I felt like that was a very important aspect of his work.
Well, you know, a lot of people try today because it's politically correct to not be a macho man. Depends which culture you are, right? But you know, it's very, very difficult to get out of a paradigm or to make changes once you are in a certain mental paradigm. And so, my feeling at all when I read about even Jung, you know, the revering females for their fertility, for their nurturance, is what a bunch of hogshot, you know, of BS. You know, in the Jewish religion, which I was reared, I'm an atheist though, the woman is revered. I was told, what are you talking about? The woman is revered. She's so important. We can't have a home without her. Yes, I said that your imagery of the importance of woman is like being in a house. There is a house, and she is the columns, the pillars that holding the ceiling. And she's standing there holding the ceiling and holding the walls, where everybody else, the guys, the husband and the sons, the children, are going in and out for their job, for school and whatever. And she's holding it. And that's the role, that traditional role, that uses and exploits the fertility ability, the ability to bear children, whatever, to take advantage of that. So I'm not impressed by all the differences, and I think I'm pretty much into gender blindness. Okay, so we have some differences, some anatomical, but most of it, I mean, those differences are not significant enough to build a whole culture upon. And so, you know, I'm with clarity on that completely.
I wanted to, you made me think about when you were saying that, kind of the image, the female image that you just painted, and it reminded me of a guy who has a PhD, who I was listening to. He's too much to tolerate, and I can't remember his name, but he self-confessed that he has narcissistic personality disorder. And he says that to a narcissist, the woman is either a saint and a mother, nurture me, mother me, or she is a harlot, and she is treacherous, and she is not to be trusted. And there's two polars, and they don't have room for anything in So
both of them need to go. Both of them need to go.
It's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah, that you just kind of.
That's a polarity that's been created in many religions and religions, cultures. I mean, he talks about what is culture in the beginning, and I thought that was very interesting. However, did anybody notice, like, he was talking about how we've created duality? That I thought was very, very interesting, because many times we speak about that good and bad, and we're like, and we always discuss that, like, good and bad. There's always things in the middle. But he spoke very clearly about how the human brain creates that. So, I mean, that is another aspect of, just as Clarity, you reacted to the word whore, I react to the word orient. I'm like, what the hell? We're not Orientals. And what does orient mean? That we're all like some, caricatures of women that are loose and you can, subdue and do whatever you want with. So whenever I hear the word orient, I'm like,
That's so funny, Jyoti. That's funny because I have a completely different idea of what that is. And I'm glad you said that, because I always thought, why did they take that word away? It's not a bad word, but it's weird that people interpret it so differently. To me, I guess originally it just meant East, right? It meant Eastern. And as far as the duality part goes, I mean, that's obviously been part of Hindu mythology or philosophy going way, way, way back, right? The, non-duality and duality versus non-duality is a big concept going way, way, way back from our culture. So, but yeah, I think so. Again, this semantic thing, people get tripped up on words based on where they're coming from and their personal experience with that word. And it's interesting to hear how it morphs like that, because I never got it. I was like, what's the big deal about that word? Why did it suddenly become a taboo word? So it's interesting.
I was speaking to a young 15-year-old who is Black African-American, and I had to ask her, what is it that you would prefer to be called? And she said, I would be preferred to be called Black. So I thought I was being all PC by, calling her African-American, but she said, no, I would prefer to be called Black. So maybe we should ask. And ask the person that we're speaking to.
Yeah.
But does anybody want to speak a little bit or explain to me a little bit more about how dualities?
Okay, so I'll offer thoughts that from a female, a woman philosopher, and that was Simone de Beauvoir. And she wrote a book that's called The Ethics of Ambiguity. And the point that in the beginning, in the introduction, the first chapter, she made the point that really at the beginning or the ground of philosophy and existence is grounded in ambiguity. That is what we live with. That is what is at the beginning of everything, is ambiguity or ambiguity, uncertainty, maybe even chaos. And we can't live with that. That was one of the things why Kierkegaard talked about subjective truth. It was his idea of how to live with ambiguity. So in not being able, like abstract art, people just don't know what to do with abstract art. I mean, Picasso, and let alone, who's the guy with all the paint squiggles all over the canvas? Help me. Anyway, but the point is that it's human nature, this is what she said, to not like or to live with ambiguity. So we have to, not have to, that's not correct. So what we do is we go with the black and the white. We go with the good or bad. We go with the characterization, the categorization, or categorizing. And so that's how we wind up. It's when we can live with ambiguity, when that we will perhaps, and maybe the operative word for that would be tolerance, and that would be empathy, and that would be understanding, beginning to learn how to live with other ideas and other cultures and other paradigms. That's maybe one of the way forward. Stop making it a black and white world. I mean, why can't women be philosophers? There's nothing naturally or genetically or so. I mean, that's just one example I give, but that's my input on the question of duality.
He did speak a little bit about chaos, and what was the antithesis of chaos? Structure? I forget. I don't have my reading with me. But that was interesting to me that he is actually considering chaos because that's inertia, a scientific concept. But it's slightly different in that it's unpredictable in the web of reality.
Yeah. So how do we live with unpredictability? We break out in a sweat and we get distressed and put our head in the sand, or we face it and figure out what to do with it, I guess. But that solution isn't always a pretty one. We wind up with stereotypes and other negative results from our dealing with ambiguity and uncertainty.
We create myths.
Okay.
Well, yeah, but sometimes the myths are there to kind of fill a void. But if we were more comfortable with mystery, if I was more comfortable with not knowing what happens to me after I die, or that I'll never really truly know my soul, that it cannot be known, then I wouldn't need so many myths to kind of come in and like save the day. I think in a way that can sometimes cause people to have an over-reliance on their myths, on their various myths. So I think that I got that from that when Terry, when you were talking about being comfortable with ambiguity, that's what I thought about, is how I would like to be more comfortable with mystery in my life. I do enjoy it, but I would like to enjoy it more, and ambiguity as well. And I think duality, I don't know if that's what the question you were asking, Jyoti, but I look at the Tao, I read the Tao Te Ching a lot, and I find that useful for me. It's a good antidote for kind of the Old Testament in a way, because that was a big part of my upbringing. But I find that I love the way that duality is portrayed in that book, and it helps me out. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Smith also talked about the concept of knowing thyself. What did anybody think about that? Because I think knowing thyself in, shall I say, layman's terms, I call that the work of personhood. And the work of personhood is continuous and difficult. So I just wanted to hear what other people's take were on Kenneth Smith, knowing thyself as part of the aristocratic Greek ethos.
That's a study, and I think we're finally getting to that, Sharon, that we are studying privilege so intimately that we look inside and see, hey, how am I privileged? That's just a different word for knowing thyself, and in a certain category. And that's why I asked Ayana, like, hey, what would you like to be called? That's your decision, not mine. And everything comes from knowing yourself. Your actions are so much more different once you know yourself, or your history, or your capacities, where you came from, where your parents came from, what privileges they had and what capacity they had. and not holding it against them, knowing that they did the best they could. And that requires a lot of grieving, a lot of, like reading your chapters and going, oh, I did the best to survive. However, they did the best with the tools that they had. And they might have, turned me into a super anxious person because that was the only way I could live and survive at that time. However, I don't need to be that person anymore. So I can, but to get to that point, you need a lot of, you need to go back and get a lot of insight about your story and, grieve the fact that, hey, the only way for you to survive was being anxious. And after all that grieving, you begin to, at some point, appreciate that, hey, you know what? They did the best they could. And I'm so-and-so years old now, and I don't need to carry it. I don't need to carry that anxiety with me anymore because, I can survive without it. I can choose to survive. I can't survive without it. I have the capacity to survive without it completely. Clarity,
Well,
it's nice to see a smile on your face.
You should give yourself a pat on the back because you read Smith's work. This is a very insightful piece, in my opinion. And
Yes.
and having taken the time to tough it out, I had to use my dictionary and lexicon more than I have in the past year. I couldn't find a definition of Amythia. I had to read the piece in order to understand the word Amythia. But seriously, having read this piece and discussed it is, I think we all get to add a bean to the jar.
Mhm.
Terry, I'm very happy to hear you say that because I am not a philosopher at all. And I was armed with the dictionary. I mean, I come from a science background, and so a lot of this terminology was strange. And I want to just piggyback on what Jyoti said. I think knowing thyself goes a little bit deeper than that. And Kenneth Smith does talk about it, and he talks about gnosis. Is that the word? I hope I'm saying it right.
Yes, you do.
Gnosis is the term for a difficult and an obscure form of insight, right? Which is occasionally lead us to clarity, light, and freedom. And that I see is the work of personhood. And from my own experience, as I got older, I got happier. I got more and more comfortable with myself. I'm now in my late 60s and not too much phases me because I've experienced it. And I know exactly what I can deal with. And life, I don't want to say it becomes more predictable, but it becomes more manageable. And that, I think, is part of the value of old age.
So one day we're going to read the book called The Myth of Sharon.
Probably.
Sharon, I second it. And I think that's the advantage we do have. One of the few advantages compared to the disadvantages. But to your question, the way I understand Know Thyself and its relationship to mythology is it's very, very difficult to know thyself.
Yes.
We always have blind spots. It's so much easier to see the other person clearly than to see myself. And most of the work done that motivates and pushes us is subconscious. And that's the unfortunate thing for us humans, that our consciousness is constantly trying to catch up, but we are not really in charge of a lot of the subconscious stuff. Now, yes, experience helps because you look back at you find patterns and you infer from it what really is that ticked you or didn't, and so forth. But mythology is kind of a projective test, just like a Rorschach or a dream. You look at the story, and because you have a little distance from the story, it's not you, it's a story. And in some ways, though it reflects parts in you that you can relate or understand better. So we can learn by projection like that, especially from stories like, for me, it's the cave, Plato's cave or what. But yeah, in that way, mythology is very, very revealing.
I gotta go, ladies. Thank you very much. And any gents that might be left, but I've really enjoyed this, and thank you all.
Yes, thank you. And you can wait on my book, James. It's coming.
And it's Terry.
Terry.
Yeah. The chapters will feature the mistakes and the the things you got right?
That's right. Because, like Kenneth Smith said, you have to encounter the difficulty to grow. And I believe that sincerely.
Yes. Thank you all. Have a good afternoon.
Goodbye. I'm leaving too. Bye, guys.
Yeah.
And thank
Bye,
you,
guys.
David.
Thank you so much. It was such an interesting conversation, and
Thank you, David.
All right.
thank you, David, for organizing it.
But wait, before we go, David, I've hardly heard anything. Did you want to say anything, David?
Oh, if I want to say something, I'll say
He was
something.
listening
Don't worry
to
about that.
everything.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a natural stopping point. So thanks for being here. I think we'll be doing something next week. I don't know what, but we'll see.
This is the quietest I have ever.
This is my
What?
third. This is my
This is
third
the quietest I have ever noticed you. Like,
No, David is a quiet guy, and once in a while he'll put in the background this share information. Did you notice?
yeah, I did.
Yeah. Thank you, David. See you next
Okay.
week.
Bye-bye.
All right. I guess we'll see everybody next week.
Next week.
Oh, all right. I missed it.
Bye.
Okay, bye, everyone.
All right. All right. How are you doing, David?
I've been all right, Mark. Yeah.
Okay.
I was expecting Rick, but it was a good conversation anyway. Yeah.
Cool. Good. Yeah, I think people just took the topic and ran with it.
Hey, Claire, is there any way you could come to one of our open forums?
I was curious because you said something about an open forum last week, but I don't really know what that is.
What group are you on?
What group am I on?
Meetup.
How did I sign into this? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
It's a philosophy meetup.
Oh, wait. Florida. You're on the Florida group. That's the one, right?
I didn't know there was a group, so I'm so sorry if I'm not answering your question right. I don't.
Here. This is you, right?
Yes.
Okay. Philosophy and Society Meetup. Okay. So you go to events.
Yeah.
We'll go. You go to calendar. Here we are, the 9th. Now tomorrow, the 10th, online philosophy meetup open forum. Make sense?
Yes.
That's, 7 o'clock your time. Tomorrow. Can you make that?
I think I can.
Cool. It's just that you've made some interesting, intriguing comments, and I'd like to pursue that with your background, your story.
Oh, okay.
It sounds like you have some interesting things we could chat about.
Sounds good.
Yeah. All right. Great. So I guess I'll see you tomorrow. Anybody else who wants to stop by as well? But yeah, check on the calendar on the group that you joined.
Sounds
Philosophy
good.
and Society Meetup, and there's lots of stuff going on.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, Claire. Talk to you later.
Bye now.
Bye.